Let's begin by taking a quick look back at the history of the Common Impact Data Standard. I know some of you were intimately involved in that history, but I think this is a good opportunity to talk about that history. The Common Impact Data Standard was released in collaboration with Mark Fox at the Center for Social Services Engineering at the University of Toronto. Common Approach consulted with experts and aligned with other leading standards, such as the Impact Management Project, which itself consulted over 2,000 impact professionals. Following the norms that were identified by the Impact Management Project, the Common Impact Data Standard defined objects and relationships to represent the who, what, how much, contribution, and risk of impact. In addition to these 5 dimensions, the Common Impact Data Standard includes information on inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes, as would be typically found in a program logic model or a theory of change, to describe how the impact occurs. Let's talk a little now about what makes the Common Impact Data Standard unique. First of all, it's the only public impact data standard in the world. Second, it's the only free impact data standard. Third, it's the only academic peer-reviewed impact data standard. And fourth, it's actually available for use. In practice, in the United States, Canada, and Europe, we have 6 to 12 software aligned with the standard or in the process of aligning with the standard in these countries. We say 6 to 12 because we have 6 softwares that are already aligned. We have 3 softwares that are in the process of aligning, and we have 3 social purpose organizations that are aligning with the standard as well with their own in-house software systems. So this is where the number 6 to 12 comes from. What makes the Common Impact Data Standard so important for social impact measurement is that it makes it easier to share and aggregate data without standardizing the metrics. It allows the social purpose organizations to choose their own metrics and represent their own impact models in a shareable way. Once we have the data in this shareable format, it makes it easier to do aggregation using frameworks like the Common Framework, which we'll talk about in a future Going to School series. So it's important to note here that the Common Impact Data Standard works seamlessly with the other 3 standards to create flexible and shareable impact data. And that's very valuable and powerful for organizations looking to understand their impact and the impact of a portfolio of their investments. You've heard this said in our previous Going to School sessions, but at the heart of our work is a challenge of balancing the flexibility needed for social purpose organizations to choose the most relevant and useful indicators, metrics, and methodologies for their impact measurements on the one hand, with the uniformity needed in the way that impact data is collected and managed so that funders and investors receive impact data that they can aggregate in order to analyze their portfolios and report on the impact of their investment. So this has been the challenge and what we've tried to balance in our Common Impact Data Standard. So how are the standards flexible? First, social purpose organizations have the flexibility to use their own measurement approaches and indicators. So they choose their own approaches and indicators. Second, grant makers, investors, and networks have the flexibility to use their own aggregations. So these are not predefined. Third, because SPOs have this flexibility, the standard is adaptable to culturally specific and regional approaches. How are the standards shareable? Well, social purpose organizations can easily share impact data without continuously having to re-enter it into a form. So this is shareable data that's easily transferable, and easily usable by everyone in that network. Second, grant makers, investors, and networks receive structured data, avoiding the mess of receiving multiple spreadsheets with multiple sheets in them and complex data, which they're then trying to interpret and understand. They receive the data in a very structured and shareable format, which allows more seamless import and use of that data. And the social purpose organizations share impact data and data about the data, allowing many aggregations. Because the Common Impact Data Standard allows you to share data that is very rich, it allows you to do analysis that is more complex and more nuanced. And that's a very powerful tool and something that this standard enables. Let's now go into a little bit more detail on the Common Impact Data Standard. In these next set of slides, I will describe in more detail the process of how the data standard works. There are 5 basic steps for social purpose organizations and funders to use the Common Impact Data Standard together. First, the social purpose organizations must measure their impact to a minimum standard as specified in the Common Foundation. So essentially, they have to cover the 5 essential practices of impact measurement outlined in the Common Foundations. Once they have met that standard, social purpose organizations record their impact data in a software that is aligned with the Common Form and the Common Impact Data Standard. An example of an aligned software, CSI's Impact Dashboard, is shown here. As I've said, there are currently 6 aligned software, 3 in the process of aligning, and 3 organizations that are aligning their own in-house software systems with the Common Impact Data Standard. It's important to note as well that the social purpose organizations that are using these aligned software it's not necessarily apparent to them that the standards have been implemented. The softwares aligned with the data standard does the work of labeling and structuring the impact data in the background. So it's not something that the social purpose organizations have to explicitly think about. Once the social purpose organizations have entered their data in an aligned software, social purpose organizations are now able to export what's called a JSON LD file, which is basically a way of storing all the data in the Common Impact Data Standard. So it captures all the classes or objects. It captures all the relationship between the classes and objects. And it captures all the data about the data in this JSON LD file. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that in the next few slides. But SPOs are now able to export from their softwares a JSON LD file that contains all this rich data in the Common Impact Data Standard format, which they can then share with their funders and partners. At that point, when funders receive files from a variety of different social purpose organizations. And they're all receiving these JSON LD files, which contain objects and classes and data and properties and relationships according to the Common Impact Data Standard. They are now able to then import this data that's coming to them in a very structured fashion into their aligned software or a custom database or Excel or whatever they choose. And they now have the data across all their different investees. Now that the funders have all this data across all their different social purpose organizations, they're now free to be able to use their own aggregations using things like the SDGs or the Iris Plus or some custom framework or the common framework in this case, to be able to do their own analysis and aggregate and understand portfolio level impacts and so on. The important thing here you should also understand is that the data standard enables the social purpose organizations and the funders to use their own software. Okay, we don't pre-select the software for them, and to use their own measurement approach that is the best fit for the needs without having to re-enter their impact data every single time. Now I will talk in a little bit more detail about the classes and properties of the Common Impact Data Standard itself, the most exciting part. The Common Impact Data Standard is as we've already noted, is a structured data model informed by science and leading best practices. We've already talked about the fact that it involved consultations with impact professionals, but data ontology experts were also part of the mix. It was a long and drawn-out process, so it has been really informed and by science and leading best practice, and also the organizations that were going to be implementing this standard. The Common Impact Data Standard organizes the data into a number of classes or objects, each with their own properties, which allow you to capture important data about the data in those classes or objects, along with the relationships to other classes or objects. So if you look at this, if you look at the Common Impact Data Standard, each of these classes, for example, the outcome class that's represented in the diagram in front of you, is a complex table with all sorts of data about the data. In the diagram we see here, we see several important classes that are typically part of impact models. And we see, along with that, we see some of their properties and some of the interrelationships. So for example, here we see the outcome class captures the outcomes of the organizations. These outcomes are linked to broad themes, sometimes externally defined and often externally defined, like those from the SDGs or IRIS+, but they can also be internally defined themes. The outcomes have indicators associated with them. And you can see here that indicators can be linked to more than one outcome. So you see, for example, the second indicator over here linked to the first outcome and the second outcome. And each of these indicators have certain properties, important information about the indicators. So, for example, these are just a subset of the properties, mind you. The indicator contains information about the method used to collect the data on the indicator. It may contain information about the threshold value for that indicator. It may contain information about a baseline value for that indicator. It may contain additional information like what externally defined IRIS metric is it tied to. So it contains a lot of information that is part of that indicator class. Okay, and similarly, the outcome has indicators associated with it, different stakeholder outcomes through the stakeholder class, stakeholder outcomes that are associated with this outcome. Which stakeholders is this an outcome for? How important is that outcome for the stakeholders? And it basically, each of these classes contain lots of data about the data. And if you look at, in addition to the indicator report, we have in addition to the indicator class, we also have the indicator report. And the indicator report, again, is it reflects of the value of the indicator at a certain point in time. And so it contains a lot of information about when that indicator value was captured. So it talks about the method that might have been used to capture that indicator value. It may talk about where, or it may note where the indicator was, where the data was collected. And it may indicate the time frame for which this data is valid. So indicator reports, again, capture information that are relevant to the indicator. So each of these classes, I think what is important to understand is contains data about the data and contains the relationships there between each of these different classes. And that's very, very important to be able to represent the impact models of the different social purpose organizations. So in my opinion, it's very well designed. But we're still learning about things and little changes that might be necessary as we go forward. And the value of this structured data model is that it allows you to group your analysis. It allows you, for example, to group by themes, such as the SDGs, because the data is shared in a way that captures all the data about the data. This aggregation can happen across projects within an organization or across organizations. So you really have this Common Impact Data Standard, really, because it is sharing and data in in similar with this in particular classes with particular properties, it allows you to very easily or more easily aggregate and analyze across projects or across organizations. In this example we see here, similar outcomes are grouped around a particular theme. So we see here, for example, around the theme of affordable housing, we have the 4 outcomes associated with it. Around the theme of climate adaptation, we see 2 outcomes associated in the data set that this particular organization has. And in addition to that outcome that are associated with that particular theme, we also have the indicators associated with that. We also have the indicator reports associated with that. We also have the stakeholders associated with that. So there's a lot of rich data that's coming in here as you look at this structured data model. And you know, the power, as I've said, is that it gives you this rich data set that allows all kinds of analysis now. So going back, so talking a little bit more detail and linking this to the Common Impact Data Standard, let's go back to the way that the SPOs enter their data in the aligned softwares. In this case, we see that SPOs or social purpose organizations are entering data into the Common Impact Data Structure when they're entering their data in the software, and it's happening in the background. So as you enter data about your indicator, the software is capturing that data in the indicator class. As you were entering data about your outcomes, the software is capturing that data as an outcome class, and so on and so forth. And once that happens, and also the relationships between the outcomes and the indicators and stakeholders, etc., all of that is being captured in the software without you having to do anything. And then when the social purpose organizations export the JSON LD file, which, as we noted before, is a whole database in a text file, which they are then sharing with their funders and partners, they are effectively exporting those classes of data that they have captured in the software. So they are, without realizing it, they're sending indicator objects or indicator classes with certain properties. They're sending outcomes with certain properties. They're sending themes that they're using within the organizations with certain properties. They're sending indicator reports, etc. And all of that is going in this JSON LD file. It contains all this rich data in that JSON LD file that's going to the funders and partners. And then funders, on their part, are creating their own aggregations. So they're receiving this data from their social purpose organizations that they have funded. And they're now able to, as I said, aggregate across all of these organizations and all of their different projects, because it has come to them in specified objects with specific information about those objects. And they can use, the SDGs or the IRIS Plus or custom frameworks or the common framework to do that analysis. And we'll actually talk about the common framework, I think, in 2 presentations from now. But so this is really the power of the Common Impact Data Standard and what it's doing. Of course, as I say this, I think it's important to recognize that there are challenges, and we are actually seeing how this works in practice. So we're in the process. This is what we envision is going to be the process of and the impact of shareable and flexible impact data. But we're still seeing, we're still implementing these and seeing how SPOs are using the standard and using the software. And this is all happening in the Pathfinder palette. So we're still learning as this is going on, but in theory, this is what we expect to happen over the life of the standard, and as it hopefully becomes a big globally used impact standard. I think one question that people often ask is, why did Common Approach choose JSON LD as a store of data? Why not use Excel? Well, the answers are as follows. The data that is captured in the Common Impact Data Standard, or through the Common Impact Data Standard, is very complex, multidimensional, and interconnected, especially when we collect data that is more what's called essential and full tier. And I'll talk about that when we talk about the software alignment. But it's essential and full tier is data aligned with the impact management norms. And full tier data is, in addition, data that has impact models and gives the how of impact. So the moment we have data that is very complex and more complex, it becomes very, very, very difficult to represent that in simple Excel files. What you end up getting are multiple complex Excel sheets, which would, with multiple sheets, with, and you can think about the challenge of standardization if you're trying to capture this data across 6,000 social purpose organizations. It becomes very, very complex, very, very rapidly if you're trying to use Excel. And there isn't some sort of standardized store of data that you can use that collects all the common impact data standard classes and objects and properties and relationships. If you don't have that, it becomes very, very difficult for you to, have aggregation or scale this in any fashion. So JSON LD was selected because it's a standardized way of storing all the data that is platform independent. It contains all the metadata and it contains all the relationships between the data objects. So in that sense, it's a great way of ensuring that we have scalable and shareable impact data across organizations that is easier to understand and aggregate and analyze than what might come in Excel sheets. So what do we get out of all of this work? I've already talked about it a bit, but I think just expanding on that a little bit, the Common Impact Data Standard enables flexible and shareable impact data. This kind of data is very important for decision makers and social purpose organizations and social financial institutions as they try to understand their impact. So remember, I think we talked about data that's very, very rich, that comes with all metadata associated with it. And because it's so rich, the impact data in effect is collected to its fullest potential because we are now able to do more complex analysis, more complex aggregations, more complete aggregations in some sense, with data that is more rich, more well-defined and well-structured. And by the way, easier to get into my system. So, it has a lot of power in that sense. And the other benefit is that investees and investors now have the ability to share and link and aggregate data with each other. So if you are now part of a network of social purpose organizations, you can now understand more easily your combined impact on certain outcomes. So it has that power. As an investor, you're now able to gather data across a wide variety of social purpose organizations and be able to understand a whole amount of disparate investments, and because you're able to combine and analyze the data more easily. So in that sense, when we make impact measurement and the sharing of impact data more easy in this way, it's a high return on time and cost, both for the investee and the investor. So this is the power and the impact of what we get with flexible and shareable impact data. In these next few sections, I will talk about how softwares, social purpose organizations, and funders can align with the Common Impact Data Standard. So I'll talk about why we have the three tiers in a bit. But when softwares align, they can align at what we call three tiers: the basic tier, the essential tier, and the full tier. And at the basic level, we are capturing the most basic impact data. This is data that will be required during the first 2 years of the social finance fund, at least by proposal. So this is basic, very basic impact data. And when softwares align at the basic tier, what they're doing is they're giving anyone who uses that software the capacity to capture classes and properties that are going to be necessary to, at a very basic level, measure your impact. So it allows you to capture certain properties and classes. There are currently 5 classes that are captured in the basic tier. At the essential tier, we are basically aligning with the impact management norms. And at this point, we're collecting basic tier data plus additional impact data, more additional impact data. We're collecting data around stakeholders, characteristics. There's a lot of additional data we are now capturing at the essential tier. And we're now at this point, when a software is aligned at essential tier, it's offering the ability for anyone who uses that software to capture data aligned as per the impact management norm. So it's the essential tier data. And at the full tier is when you're getting the complete model of impact, which gives you a good representation. So it's essential tier data plus full impact models such as the theory of change or outcome maps and characteristics of data quality. So it has the most complete data that we have right now. And it allows you, it's a representation now of the how. And again, what softwares are doing when they're aligning at this standard, at this tier, is they're allowing anyone who uses that software to enter fields or properties at this standard. I see there's a chat. I will answer those questions at the end. Of course, the question is why the tiers? And the fundamental reason is that tiers make it easier for softwares to align more quickly, as it provides an easy entry point. So we're not asking them, a high ramp onto which or a high set of requirements which they have to jump into if they haven't done it before. But we're providing an easier on-ramp for softwares to align more quickly. More importantly, it's also matching where many social purpose organizations are in terms of their impact data. So it's allowing softwares to provide software at a level where social purpose organizations are currently, many are currently, right? So it's not only is it making it easier for softwares to align, but it's also meeting the users of that software where they're at. Once you've done that initial alignment, it becomes easier for software to then move to essential and full tiers. And this is also in movement with their customers' needs. And we have the different levels of alignment because, of course, there are social purpose organizations that may be already collecting data at the essential tier or at the full tier. And so we do allow organizations to go through this process of align or softwares to align in any of these points, but they start at the basic tier and they move in. So even if they go to essential tier, they first have to align at the basic tier and then they align at the essential tier and then they align at the full tier. So there is a process by which softwares align. And the whole process is designed to make it easier for softwares to align, meet the social purpose organizations where they are, and also provide options to social purpose organizations. Because if you make it easier to align, it also means that the likelihood of additional softwares adopting, aligning with the standard goes up. And that means you'll have more softwares available, which means that it increases the considerations that, and also the competition, by the way, between the different softwares, so that you have a more rich ecosystem from which you can, of softwares from which you can choose the best one for your needs as a social purpose organization. Okay, so here in this diagram, on this figure, we have the different softwares that are currently aligned. As I've said, we have 6 softwares that are aligned currently. We have 3 in the process, and as I said mentioned earlier, we have 3 that are organizations that have their own in-house systems that are also in the process of aligning. So what is the process of software alignment with, what is the process of software alignment, if you will? So first, we identify softwares that are good fits or they come to us, and we share our resources on the Common Impact Data Standard and Alignment Checklist. So we check them. And so the alignment checklist, by the way, describes different objects in the Common Impact Data Standard, so they can easily do a mapping between their objects that they have existing in their softwares and the objects that are expected and the properties that are expected in the Common Impact Data. So we share that. We normally have meetings with them talking about how getting their software aligned with the common approach will support the reporting of their clients and their commitments to the Social Finance Fund. And once we've had these series of meetings and there's a better understanding of what the Common Impact Data Standard is and why it's valuable and important for the softwares to align, they typically sign an MOU with us. And once they sign an MOU, it starts a formal process of alignment. And we are there as a technical support throughout that whole process of alignment. But in terms of the data ontology, we support that whole process as much as we can. How do funders align? This is more, investors and funders align. This is more of a decision for a policy decision for the funders. They have to decide what kind of data would they like to receive. Is it basic tier data? Is it essential tier data? Is it full tier data? So in some sense, it's a policy decision of the funders about what data they would like to receive initially. And alignment means they have the ability to import data coming in at that level, at the basic tier, data coming in at the essential tier, or data coming in at the full tier. Because they are asking their grantees or fund recipients to send them data either at the basic tier, essential tier, or full tier. And again, the tier system is sometimes also to reflect where social purpose organizations are and what their capacities are. So it also allows for that flexibility. How do social purpose organizations adopt the standard? To complete the adopt stage for the Common Impact Data Standard, it's really quite simple for the social purpose organization. They just need to use an aligned impact measurement software. And the moment they start using an impact measurement software, aligned software, they are now aligned with the Common Impact Data Standard because the software is aligned with the Common Impact Data Standard. It is able to export JSON LD files according to the Common Impact Data Standard. And those JSON LD files are now in a format, in a way that are now importable by the social financial institutions and wholesalers, etc. So the moment they adopt an aligned software, they have effectively aligned with the Common Impact Data Standard. And they've done it without even realizing, without even really knowing that they're using it, right? So that's the power of having a data ontology and aligned softwares.